right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Amaris Gonzalez, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I serve as a student life advisor for student organizations and activities at the Office of the Dean of Students, that is formerly known as SLO. Thank you for coming to the Nothing Gold Can Stay panel discussion as part of the One SDSU community programming. We will be recording this event. We will begin today's event with the Kumeyaay land acknowledgement. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony we find in inspiration from this land, the land of Kumeyaay. The goal of One SDSU community is to provide opportunities for you to learn about yourselves and the perspectives, experiences, and identities that make you unique, allowing you to connect with other students to learn about their journeys. By having these opportunities, the hope is that ultimately every member of the SDSU community comes to embrace diversity in all its forms, bringing our community together as one diverse group. One SDSU's programming framework has 3 themes, and this afternoon's program is Activating Community Dialogue. Together, we will be engaging in activities that provide learning about identities through both self-exploration and exploring others' perspectives. Over the course of today's panel discussion, feel free to make comments in the chat box. And if you'd like to pose a question to one of our speakers, please post it in the Q&A. At the end of the program, we will invite you to share about your experience with a brief survey. We hope you will take a few minutes to share your thoughts. Now I'd like to turn it over to Eric Smigel, Chair of the SDSU Arts Alive.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to welcome you to the 3rd production in this year's Arts Alive SDSU Discovery Series, which is an annual selection of events that address socio-political and cultural issues through the visual and performing arts. We're delighted to continue our partnership this semester with One SDSU, who is sponsoring these interdisciplinary panel discussions. And I'd like to thank Amaris and the team at the Center for Student Organizations and Activities for their ongoing support of arts programming across campus. Today's discussion focuses on Nothing Gold Can Stay, a concert of instrumental music performed by the SDSU Wind Symphony and Symphony Orchestra. The program comprises works exploring the disorienting experience of loss and grief, as well as the mysterious healing power of music. We all seem to resonate strongly with that strange and beautiful phenomenon of vibrating air, which helps construct our identities, reconstruct our memories, and reassure us that we're deeply connected to a larger community. The arts have long served a cathartic function in society, and the Nothing Gold Can Stay project not only offers insight into the science and experience of dealing with radical change, but also affirms the value of sharing physical space together. As our campus community reassembles, this has been an especially meaningful year for the performing arts. Although our students never stopped making music, for many of them, this will be their first time in a year and a half performing indoors with a live audience. We're so grateful for our student and faculty musicians whose ongoing creativity, industriousness, and dedication continue to enrich our community far beyond the concert hall. It's now my pleasure to introduce our featured panelists. Professor Shannon Kitelinger, Director of the SDSU Wind Symphony, Professor Michael Gerdes, Director of the SDSU Symphony Orchestra, Professor Chuck Degeneffe, Chair of the Department of Administration, Rehabilitation, and Postsecondary Education, and our special guest, neuroscientist and cognitive psychologist, Daniel Levitin.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. As Dr. Smigel said, I'm Shannon Kitelinger. I'm the Director of Bands here at San Diego State University and the conductor of the Wind Symphony in tomorrow evening's performance for Nothing Gold Can Stay. I'd like to personally thank Eric Smigel and Arts Alive SDSU, as well as One SDSU, for making not only this discussion today possible, but also for affording us the opportunity to create this event, culminating in tomorrow's performance at the Balboa Theater in downtown San Diego, featuring both the Wind Symphony and the Symphony Orchestra. As musicians, one of our primary ways of expressing ourselves is through live performance, which has made the past 18 months extremely difficult to navigate, to say the least. With the support of events like this from everyone involved, I know that the faculty and the students have all been able to feel a degree of normalcy in creating something that we're excited to share with everyone. I'm, of course, extremely also excited to be joined in this panel by our guests, who I'll introduce in just a few minutes. First, what I'd like to do is give a little bit of a talk about the concert, about the project, how it started, and where we've kind of gone with it. So Nothing Gold Can Stay is actually taken from a Robert Frost poem, and it grew from a discussion between myself and Michael Gerdes, our orchestra director, last spring about a piece of music by John Mackey titled Places We Can No Longer Go. In that piece, the composer writes music to address his mother's struggle with rapid onset dementia. The piece is told, though, in reverse order, with the music beginning in confusion but ending in coherence. Jokingly, John likes to say that nobody ever wants to hear a piece that starts coherently and finishes incoherently with confusion. So he chose to write it in reverse order. The narrative reversal creates something more than a story about the disease. Instead, the music depicts a narrative of coping, clarity, and a return to comfort. In fact, the music itself becomes a coping mechanism with the issues created by dealing with the disease. After speaking about that piece between Michael and I for quite a while, we came to the realization of another composition, Jennifer Higdon's Blue Cathedral. This piece is a musical portrait of Higdon's younger brother, who she lost to cancer. While the music depicts the character in Higdon's story, it is also the creation of a metaphysical space in which Higdon can place the memory of her brother as she continues life's journey without him. Music is itself an art within time, and while the music of tomorrow's concert is often about the process of dealing with loss and change, the music itself is curiously also an important tool that the composer uses to handle those changes. The arc of tomorrow's concert mirrors the structure of the Mackey, ending with an uplifting return to comfort. The final piece on the concert is Stravinsky's Firebird. The imagery of rebirth is integral to the mythical Firebird, and when the final brass chords ring through the hall, we're in the presence of a joyful triumph, one built upon rejuvenation and not just destruction. We've passed through a troubled time, and at least for the moment, we've found ourselves surrounded by all that is beautiful in life. We're, of course, not through our shared global crisis right now. The pandemic continues, and as musicians in the SDSU ensembles, we've adapted to change and tried to cope with new and changing guidelines for coming together and making music. Perhaps our triumph is in the process as we try to find ways to return and overcome the challenges of the past 18 months. One additional note about this project: the Discovery Series events at SDSU are unique and meant to center around our community. We're very fortunate that our wonderful leadership at SDSU has joined us with the concert project. President De La Torre, Dean Peggy Shannon, and the rest of the administration have given complimentary tickets to faculty and staff and students in appreciation of all the work and service they do for San Diego State University. As a result, as of right now, we have approximately 30 tickets available on Ticketmaster for a 1,300 seat concert hall. We're so excited for tomorrow's concert. We're excited for this panel discussion today. Before we move on to our guests, though, I'd like to play just a brief promo video about our concert tomorrow, Nothing Gold Can Stay. Thank you. And now let's introduce our guest panelists. First, I already introduced myself. My name is Shannon Kitelinger. I'm the director of bands here at San Diego State, and I conduct the Wind Symphony, which will be on the first half of tomorrow evening's concert. Next, we have Professor Michael Gerdes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Gerdes. I'm the director of orchestras here at San Diego State, and so I'll be the conductor for the second half of the program. I'm the one who had the conversation with Shannon in the earlier story. So I'll be doing the piece by Jennifer Higdon, as well as the Stravinsky Firebird. I'm also the fellow wearing the jersey in the promo video. And in my defense, I'd just like to say that it was filmed on Halloween.
That's great. Thank you, Michael. Our next guest, and if you would please just give a little bit brief introduction about yourself and maybe even how we're related to the project, maybe how we came together for this panel. Next is Chuck Degeneffe.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be part of this. As Eric mentioned, I'm the chair of administration, rehabilitation, and post-secondary education, and I'm a professor of rehabilitation counseling here at SDSU. You know, when I heard about this project, I was really excited because it connects to a lot of my research, which primarily looks at how families adjust to acquired brain injury, and things like dementia and memory loss and loss of identity and grieving are definitely parts of my research. And also I've done clinical work in terms of counseling and running support groups, and trying to kind of help individuals kind of adjust to what has been something totally unexpected for their lives, and trying to make sense of it. And one of the things I'll try to talk about today a bit is this concept of ambiguous loss, which is really particular, I think, to the composer who's made this piece, in trying to kind of make sense of this experience. And also here at SDSU, I direct the Cognitive Disability Certificate Program. So this is a topic area that we talk as part of that program. So again, it's great to be a part of this panel.
Great, thank you. And our fourth panelist, Daniel Levitin.
My name is Daniel Levitin, and I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ohlone people. And I'm a cognitive neuroscientist and musician. I study music and the brain and music and health. I'm really honored to be here on this panel with Professors Gerdes and Kitelinger and Degeneffe. And I think one of the things I want to talk about is the socio-political side of music and health. And just as a teaser, I think as Professor Smigel mentioned, when he referred to radical change and the power of the arts, talk about a radical change. The COVID lockdown disrupted the lives of nearly every person in the world, and it's no coincidence that one of the ways nearly everyone in the world coped with the isolation, disruption, and uncertainty was to increase how much music they listened to. All the streaming companies reported upticks in listening, and although artists could no longer perform in person and collaboratively with one another, wonderful adaptability to the new medium of playing together virtually and releasing their materials on the web. Healing for everybody involved.
Yeah, great. Definitely advances through the sheer need of being able to express ourselves, right? Well, thanks to everyone. This will be a very open panel discussion, so please, everybody feel free to jump in and contribute at any point. I'd like to maybe start as a launching point. Chuck, could we actually, since we kind of already talked about the Mackey piece a little bit and gave a little introduction there, could you expand on your concept of ambiguous loss and making sense of this experience? Because it's something we've tried to discuss even in our ensemble rehearsals. Trying to bring the music to life isn't just about making the notes and the right notes at the right time, but trying to understand the process the composer went through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one way to first think about it is if we compare this to individuals who have an actual death loss. It's finite. There's clear closure to the event. The individuals hopefully can move on psychologically, emotionally. They can adjust the directions of their lives. They can change the nature of their relationships. But when we think about something like advanced dementia, Alzheimer's, other kinds of progressive diseases or illnesses that result in the loss of memory, the ability to connect with other individuals, from a family perspective, that person is still there, and there's lack of clarity about what's going to happen in the future. Let's say in the case of somebody with Alzheimer's, it could perhaps they might live for a year, 5 years, 10 years. There may be kind of an unclear sense about how much the disease will advance. So in terms of being able to kind of know what's going to happen in the future, how do you relate to this person who may have been your partner, a family member, a friend, whoever it might be, maybe they don't recognize you. Maybe they don't remember kind of key moments in your life together. Maybe now you have to move into, instead of being a partner with somebody, you now shift to viewing yourself as a caregiver to that individual. And the nature of your relationship, your reciprocal relationship has really changed. And so again, trying to make sense out of that is really difficult for people. And you're kind of stuck like in this, well, there's some research that talks about you're stuck in this liminal space between kind of this anticipation of the future to what ultimately will happen in terms of the death of the person, and trying to kind of bridge that is really difficult for individuals. And also kind of adding to this, the individuals in the people's lives, other family members, friends of that individual, or like partners, families, they don't really know how to relate to that person anymore, because they don't know how to support the family members. They don't really know how to relate to the individual with the Alzheimer's or dementia. So that kind of adds to the mix. Again, I would kind of view it as like you're stuck in this gray area, this ambiguity that's really difficult to get out of. If that makes sense.
Chuck, I had a question for you, actually. I'm just curious, after listening to you talk about this concept of ambiguous loss, I was thinking a lot about, well, all the topics that come up based on this program and this panel discussion, and thinking about, the changes of the last, that the last year has brought, the last year and a half has brought. But I also started thinking about just in general, the kind of changes that just life brings to everyone. So Dr. Kitelinger and I recently, we ran a 5K, and I used to run. I used to run quite a bit, and I learned as I stumbled through that 5K that I am not the same person that I was 10 years ago. I'm not physically the same person. In no sense am I that same person. I've lost that person. And of course, it's like every time I look in the mirror and see more gray hair, I encounter the fact that I'm a new person today than I was yesterday. And in the work that you do on ambiguous loss and Alzheimer's, and at what point is there a threshold that's crossed where it feels like there's a loss of identity, where there's a real disconnect between who I was yesterday or who I identified as for most of my life and what I am now? Both for people who are suffering from it and like the family member, because it really does feel like we're all different people all the time.
Yeah, that's a great question. In my field of rehabilitation counseling, we talk a lot about careers and employment. And I think like to the person who has the impairment, has the disability, I think this sense of identity is really, really pronounced when you can't, first of all, perform like a work role. So think about like everyone on this panel, we all take a lot of pride and identity through our work. But if we get to a point where we can no longer do that job, we no longer can kind of derive that sense of identity, that's a major loss for people. And you think about all the kinds of things that you're connected to, from all of our work, your friends, you work with students, you have a sense of something you feel is fulfilling and you're making a contribution. And if you no longer can do that, again, that's a major sense of loss. But I think other ways we kind of identify ourselves, you talked about running, we sometimes identify ourselves in terms of the things we like to do for fun, the things we have hobbies with, the things we find personal enjoyment with. And if we get cut off from those kinds of things as well because of the condition we're living with, that further there's a shift, I think, for people when they can't engage with those things. And from the family member's point of view, when we think about the people that are in our lives, we have a certain way of relating to that person. They fulfill a certain need in our lives. We have a certain history with them. And I think, what's really difficult for people where they have advanced dementia is you lose those kind of memories with people over time. I think about my wife, I think about, when we first met, when I proposed to get married, and when we had our child, all those things. And if that person can't share those kind of memories anymore, they lose that ability. for the partner, that's again a major sense of loss and way of relating to that person. And there's not really like a specific time where that kind of shift happens. I think for a lot of people, it's gradual. You know, they just recognize that there's certain things that were done a certain way over time. It changes and kind of adds again to this kind of grayness of this sense of ambiguous loss.
Chuck, is there any, and I don't, this may be outside of your field. I'm thinking back to, I recently watched the Alive Inside document. That was a hit on Sundance at the Sundance Film Festival. And one of the subjects, they were of course talking about bringing music to Alzheimer's patients, and they had filmed everybody coming back to life. And you know, the focus of it really seemed to be much like these compositions, where it was focused on the partner that was watching the change in the person. So the big example is the older gentleman that hears Cab Calloway, and he wakes up, like life changes for him instantly, right? And you see how those partners are reacting. You see them, their coping mechanism happening. But what we never see is the other side of that from them. And I'm not even sure if I'm asking a question within this, but for the patient, is there research done on brain activity during this? Where does it go from there?
I think in terms of brain activity, Dr. Levitin could probably better answer that, but there's the idea of kind of this intervention of having people listen to music. There's been a lot of research since 1992. That was the first kind of intervention to where people tried this, where you basically you helped identify for that person what was the music that gives you a lot of joy, that they really like, and if possible you would try to talk to the person and kind of find out, like, do you have a certain kind of music you've always liked listening to? And if that's not possible, you might talk to the family members. You might, if they have like an iPod, you might try to look at their music list and see what kind of music do they have, and then you have them listen to that on a structured, like 30 minutes a day, something like this. And there's a lot of research that will show that there's tangible benefits to that. There's a decrease in agitation, which is a common symptom for people with Alzheimer's. There's a decrease in anxiety and depression. And then from the family caregiver's point of view, it also helps them because they see like a positive response that maybe they haven't seen before in that person. They see like joy, they see happiness. And I wanted us to quickly read, this was a study in Wisconsin, where they tried to use this kind of intervention basically in nursing homes around the entire state. And this is an intervention that's used internationally. So you see this all the time. So this is from a mother's point. This is from a daughter's point of view from her mother, seeing like the impact that it had from this kind of intervention. She says, music brings life to mom. I see my mother's face when she has her headphones on, and she looks genuinely happy, calm, and peaceful. I once again see the smile that this horrible disease is trying to take from her. Occasionally, she will even sing again, with the music providing the ability to recall words that she has lost. Yes, music brings life back to mom. The music and memory program has benefited me just as much as my mom. I am here to see glimpses of happiness that the music provides her, and it fills my heart with joy. So you can imagine, like, if you see this decomposition of your family member, somebody you dearly love, and you see that they have a sense of happiness and return a bit to who they were, it can be tremendously helpful for both people, the patient as well as the family member. Yeah, so music is a tremendous intervention. There's no doubt about it. And it reaches something inside the person. There's some theories we'll talk about that our recall for music, our sense of our memory for music may be more intact than like our ability to kind of like declarative memory, where if you're a student and I give you a test, you have to recall the information from the test. That kind of ability, you lose that more than, or your ability to recall music and your connection to music lasts longer, it seems like, than other forms of memory. So again, this music is a tremendous intervention.
Does anybody, Daniel, do you know why that is? Does anybody know why that is? I don't, as a conductor, but I think back to like, COVID was so difficult for so many, and I lost my grandfather, and but I was fortunately able to spend some time by his bedside before he passed, and everybody spoke to him, but one of the moments that was most touching. It felt like he was responsive as we started playing music, old songs that he used to like, and it seemed like it worked. But I have a lived experience and intuition about music having that power, but I don't understand why should playing a polka have made a difference to my grandfather, in his final days, and not as big a difference as like hearing our voice. Like what's actually happening in the brain?
Well, I was going to have an answer until you said that he liked polkas, and so now I'm completely thrown off. But uh, the available evidence is that the music pathways in the brain are phylogenetically older than the language pathways. In other words, they evolved earlier, and so they're deeper in the brain. By virtue of that, in part, they're more resistant to uh, decay processes and disease. But that's not the whole of it. The other two parts of it are we tend to remember best that which we care about the most. The key to memory is you have to be emotionally invested in the experience or the knowledge in order to remember it. I always tell my students before an exam, you have to at least pretend like you really care about this material if you want to be able to remember it. Because if you don't, it's not going to get in there. There's an infinite number of things that are competing to get encoded in your memory, and we've evolved systems that, for the most part, something emotional is usually important. It's a lion attacking you, or it's an attractive mate, winking an eye at you. I mean, these things are emotionally laden. Discovering water after you've been parched for a few days. But the third part of it all is that music is multidimensional, as you all know. I don't need to tell the two maestros. There's pitch, there's rhythm, timbre. The brain extracts pitch in the service of building it up into a representation of melody and harmony. It extracts duration in order to build up a sense of meter and tempo. There's larger scale form having to do with the interplay of these elements over time. And because there are so many features or elements of music, in fact, it seems fantastic and unlikely, but it's true. These features are encoded separately in the brain. And so we have a lot of different ways, multiple access routes into the brain when we're talking about music. And so for all these reasons, music tends to last longer. And you were talking about, you had asked the question, do we have any information about what's going on in the brains of people who are experiencing either Alzheimer's induced dementia or non-Alzheimer's induced dementia? There are different kinds of dementia, but memory loss and the kind of loss of sense of self that Professor Degeneffe mentioned. If you don't remember who your spouse is or your wedding day or whether you like ice cream, that latter one seems trivial, but you don't really have a sense of who you are anymore when you forget these things. And brain scans show that there's obviously some brain activity because the person's alive, and we say that legally a person's dead when all brain activity ceases. But I think the best way to understand it is that most individuals come in and out. They have good days and bad days. Those good days and bad days become increasingly far apart, and then they become good hours and bad hours. And then every once in a while, you get somebody like Henry in the movie, who after seeming catatonic for months comes alive. He's alive inside. And I think the best analogy is imagine you're driving on the interstate and you're listening to a terrestrial radio station, not satellite radio. And at some point, the signal gets a little scratchy and distorted, and it's still there. And you can sort of make out the song if it's already begun, because you've got expectations and you're getting little pieces of it. But a new song could come on, and if there's enough static and enough dropouts in that signal, you may not be able to figure out what that song is. You just get these little bits and pieces. And then suddenly your brain puts it all together and then, oh yeah, okay, that was Mac the Knife. So it's a continuum, just as Professor Degeneffe was saying about when does it happen. It's a continuum. You typically cannot point to a moment and say, okay, that person's gone.
Daniel, if you don't mind, we have a student here with us that had a question for you, kind of along the lines of what you've been already discussing. Amanda, would you join us? Amanda's one of our percussionists in the School of Music and Dance and one of our performers, and she's happy to have you. She was very excited to see you because she immediately said, I've read his book so many times.
Hi, Dr. Kitelinger. Thank you. And hi, Daniel. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to ask this. As Dr. Kitelinger said, I'm very excited to be here today. So as we've been discussing, people are familiar with the emotional effects of music and its ability to positively impact us in that way. But in your book, you go into the cognitive aspects of it, like referencing cases where people have had traumatic injuries to areas of their brain, which would make it seem impossible for them to tie their shoes, let alone play a musical instrument, and yet they were able to. So I was wondering, could you discuss that for those of us who may not have read your book, and share any new discoveries in that area since it was published, and relate that to the topic of mental health?
Well, that's a big question. Do you want me to do it all while standing on one foot as well?
However you'd like, standing, sitting, whatever's most comfortable.
So for the reasons we were talking about, music has these preserved pathways. And we do see these odd disconnects, what we call dissociations, where you can't tie your shoe or bring food from the plate to your mouth, but you can still play an instrument. Part of the story there is that playing an instrument forms a chain of events that are all interconnected temporally, rhythmically. And so once you get started, one follows the next. This might be modeled mathematically or in engineering as a Markov chain, but just a fancy way of saying that once you get started, you can keep going. And you can use a combination of muscle memory and motor memory and your knowledge of music. I know a number of classical players and jazz players who say that there'll often be a piece of music they're trying to memorize, and there's two notes an octave apart. Ba, ba, and they've got to play this run of 30-second notes between them. They don't actually memorize every single note. They just know that it's going to be a major scale or a harmonic minor scale or a Dorian or whatever it is, and their brain figures the rest of it out. They don't have to encode each note individually. So part of the preservation is your higher order cognitive knowledge of music that allows you to listen to what you just played or what other people are playing. And that kind of kickstarts you into what's supposed to come next, along with these other things. What's new since then is, I would say, an appreciation for the musician brain, that musician brains are different. I mean, but in one sense, it's trivial to say that because everybody's brain is different, and tennis players' brains are different from 5K runners' brains and from musicians' brains and therapists' brains. But, because we build up skill sets and ways of thinking. But in the case of the musician, one of the things that happens is the corpus callosum becomes thicker, the bundle of fibers that connects the two hemispheres. And we see that over and over again, and that helps to facilitate communication between the right brain and the left brain, shuttling information back and forth, combining emotion with logic, knowledge of music with feel for music, being able to combine technique, which tends to be, related to the word technical, with emotional expression. Who wants to hear a technical performance of a musical piece? Not me. I don't want to hear a lot of mistakes, but I would take those for the emotion, which is the story of Rubinstein. Arthur Rubinstein makes a lot of mistakes when he's playing the piano, if you follow the score, but I take him over a technician any day.
Thank you very much. I definitely really appreciated that answer and elaboration.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you, Amanda.
Sorry, I'm just getting a few questions I wanted to get at here. I wanted to ask, one of the things we had talked about at one point was how the same music might impact different individuals or individuals differently. That emotional connection impact how one hears a piece of music. So, the experience in the room being different for everyone, of course. So as we're performing tomorrow night, how it triggers one person versus another. And I mean, we'll have a different experience on the stage than they will in the audience.
Sorry, Shannon, I don't know if you broke up there, but I'll pop back in and actually ask about this because I'm sort of curious. Either Daniel or Chuck. Daniel, this is probably going to move into your sort of area of research and understanding. But we've talked a bit about how there's sort of, you mentioned these phylogenetically older pathways in the brain, and so I understand this is like if I'm listening to a piece of music and my brain has in some ways some of the pathways have started to deteriorate, the ones that transmit music may last longer, they may survive, and so music that has made some sort of imprint or had an influence on me still speaks to me, still has an effect. But I'm curious, for a lot of what this concert is about is I guess is that the music is about coping with change or loss or moving on, but it's also a tool for it. And in what way, does every person experience music, or can a person experience music in that way? And so I guess the question that I have is, I mean, like, what about a piece of music allows it to work as a coping mechanism? Or what about anything allows it to work as a coping mechanism with the brain? I mean, is that content that can be in a piece of music? Is it in any sense universal? I mean,
I'm happy to start, but then I think Chuck should fill in on the coping part. I think what you've done is you've defined the difference between art and non-art. Art is something that allows different people to interpret it in different ways, unlike a scientific finding or an equation, which means exactly what it is, or a news story. If you still believe in news and truth, which some people in the country don't. But you read a finding, and it means something, and you're meant to interpret it in a certain way. But the very definition of art, of painting, ballet, sculpture, literature, music, theater, is that there's no right answer. It's intentionally made with some ambiguity because life is ambiguous. Life rarely delivers us pure emotion. We're rarely purely happy or purely sad. More often, it's a bittersweet emotion, or sadness mixed with a tinge of sweetness and fondness, especially when dealing with a loved one who no longer recognizes us. It's sad, it's disappointing, it's tragic, but there's a sweetness there when we look at them and remember our shared experience and see that, there still is an essence of that person there. So I went to a book reading group yesterday, a book club, and we were talking about John le Carré, the spy fiction writer. And one of the points made there was that you never really know how these stories come out. That part of le Carré's appeal is that, like a good piece of music, like the three pieces you're playing at the concert tomorrow, it can mean different things to you, and it might mean different things to you at different times in your life. You can toss, turn it over. It impels you to engage with the work. You are an active participant in deciphering it, unlike an equation or a headline where somebody's done the work for you. Now, how that leads to coping, I would refer to the expert on.
I think it's this idea Daniel mentioned, like encoding, and there's certain music that you link it to an emotion maybe that you felt at that point, and in a very unconscious type of way. For me, I listen to, sometimes I hear like Jerry Rafferty from the 70s. I started thinking about growing up with my family home, and just kind of hanging out with my friends during the summertime, and that was like music I heard during that time. So emotionally, it just takes me to a certain place, and this is all very just automatic. It's there's no kind of conscious thought behind, like I want to feel a certain way. So you just hear it, and then something happens automatically. And this type of intervention I was mentioning before for individuals with Alzheimer's, I think that is the goal. That maybe it takes them to a place that they have a sense of happiness, a sense of calm, a sense of connection with other people, family members, happy events, and we never really know what music is going to fulfill that function or not. I mean, it's sort of like also things like you smell something and you have an automatic reaction to it, and it evokes a certain kind of emotion, and you have a certain kind of affective response to it, and it's all very automatic. It's all very non-conscious. And I think from the family member's point of view, it can fulfill the same kind of function. It can be a form of like escape, because let's say you're in a situation where you can't really solve it in the immediate moment. You may have a family member who's in the case of Alzheimer's, experiencing tremendous challenges, and they're kind of changing in front of you, and you as a caregiver, you really don't have a way to solve that. And sometimes the music is just a way to kind of just escape for an hour or two, and then you're able to kind of gain some strength from that, and some release, and then kind of go back to the situation that that's presented to you, and it gives you that kind of capacity maybe to handle things more than you would otherwise without that kind of escape. And I think Michael, to the question about how do we all react to any kind of music, I bet like in the musical performance tomorrow, you're probably going to have like 1,300 different kind of reactions to it, because it is such a subjective, individual type of thing. And maybe it's like one note in the performance that takes you to a certain place, and you're not even aware of it. And that's kind of the magic of music, and the mystery of it. Why does it work? I don't know.
Well, see, that's really what that's one thing that I'm super curious about, because I like your, when you compare it to something like a smell, but when you talk about Jerry Rafferty or whatever kind of music it is that you grow up with, okay, well, this feels like it's 100% about you, and the music just exists. It became the soundtrack to your life and the soundtrack to your memories, and so now when you hear that piece of music, it does something. It transports you. It takes you to a place. But it could be anything. It could be, it was whatever was the soundtrack of your life at the time. But when you compare it to something like smell, there are certain smells that seem to more commonly conjure memories, right? And then there are certain smells that are almost universally disliked by people. And so I'm always curious as a conductor, because we, generally speaking, if I'm in a room full of musicians, room full of students, and we'll say like, can music express something? Can it express emotions? Yes. All right. Well, which emotions? Yes. You know, like that, and there we'll find like a general agreement that this sounds happy to me, or this sounds, and it's hard to like to just leave linguistic content out, you know, but that this sounds happy, this sounds sad, this feels bittersweet. I mean, there'll be 1,300 strikingly different specific interpretations of how a piece felt or what it might have been about. But strangely enough, it always seems to me like there's also a sort of universal direction that people generally tend to push in. And I wonder where that comes from. Like, what does music actually express other than pitch, rhythm, timbre, you know, harmony, melody, all those things?
Well, on the emotional side, if I could jump in here, we make a distinction between so-called basic or first order emotions and secondary emotions. So happiness, sadness, calm, rage, delight, joy, tranquility, peacefulness. These are things that music can express. Not so clear that music can express jealousy or greediness or envy. I mean, those are so-called secondary emotions. So it's not that any emotion goes. I mean, maybe you can come up with a counterexample, but it would be unusual. And you know, normally it would be only by virtue of the fact that the song was associated with a particular event. I think of this song as the greedy song because it's the song that was playing when my landlord hiked my rent, you know, kind of a thing. Nothing intrinsic to the song. Um, and but then getting back to the point about why music can evoke memory and some smells, but not others can. I think a general principle of memory is that these memory triggers work best when they're unique to a time and place. So I'd be willing to venture that not every song conjures memory as well as every other song. Happy Birthday probably doesn't conjure the vivid memories that Jerry Rafferty does. Even, you know, his old band, Steelers Wheel, Stuck in the Middle with You. Uh, the Baker Street, you know, his big first solo hit. Th those are embedded in our memories with a time and place because they were popular and played a lot, and we listened to them a lot. And sure, we've listened to them since then, but Happy Birthday, geez, you've heard it thousands of times in thousands of different places. Same thing with smell. If there was a smell of a particular tree that was, you know, in front of your house when you were a kid, and then you moved away, and you're walking down the street and you smell that again, you're back home. But if it's a smell you smell all the time, unlikely.
Okay, so I have a question about that. That I just want to drill down a bit, Dana, with like with the examples that you chose, because I think they're fantastic. Because as soon as you started talking about Happy Birthday, I was like, okay, so what pieces of music are like that for me? And then my mind immediately went to what pieces have turned around, and what does that? What imbues some piece of music with new meaning? So I think there was a period in my life where like 5 years where Beethoven's Ninth Symphony was like Happy Birthday. Like it was just this overstuffed, overperformed thing that I had no space for. And then I remember hearing a performance of it and it completely changing the piece. But even further, it also made, just thinking about that topic made me start to wonder, well, what about something like Happy Birthday? So there's a very different sort of sense of like, of imagining, you know, the servers at TGI Fridays performing Happy Birthday, and all of a sudden hearing Marilyn Monroe sing it to JFK. And so that feels like it's beyond pitch, timbre, you know, all these musical elements, but there's something about the performance element that can take the same pitches, the same rhythms, the same arrangement of these things, and can imbue with them with some more power, some more meaning. I don't know. I'm curious. Like,
Well, I mean, you're describing your job. Your job as a conductor is to somehow create a new experience for the listener with a familiar piece. And to the extent you're successful, you'll implant a new memory because it causes the listener to hear it differently, hear it anew, reinterpret it. That happened for me with Mahler's Second. I had heard it many, many times. I knew it as fairly well as you can know a difficult piece like that. And I've been hearing it for decades. And then Michael Tilson Thomas did it in San Francisco with Edwin Outwater conducting the backstage portion of the orchestra. And this was just 4 years ago, and it was transformative. It really moved me. And I remember the time and the place and the people I was with, because it happened to me a week ago with a song that had lost its ability to conjure time and place, which is the Beatles' A Little Help from My Friends. And I heard a singer I know named Tim Hockenberry just kill it. It was the most exciting thing I had heard in months. And it transformed my understanding of a song I already knew well. And I think that's what all of us as musicians try to do. If we're doing a cover, of course, if we're doing we're not debuting a piece.
Right. And so is that, so do you think is it an element of not, so we had a student actually in the chat who's performing on the concert say, how does, what do I want the audience to feel as I play, and how can my playing help reflect that? If you want a piece to make an impact, is the suggestion that, is it novelty or newness as opposed to, I mean, how much of making a piece have an effect on a person or creating that new imprint is just about doing something different? Is that more important than precision? Or I'm curious, like, what is it that, when we hear these new or these novel versions of it, is that the difference, that it just sounds so different than what we heard before?
I would say no, it's not. Novelty can be part of it. So it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. I still believe in the power of the human spirit to convey something from one human being to another. I don't think computers are going to be able to do this anytime in our lifetime. So it's not like you can work out, all right, I'm going to use 30% novelty and 47.8% of thinking intently about a particular emotion. I don't think it works like that. I think when a performer gets swept away in the moment and makes a piece reflect their actual feeling, not a pretend feeling, not a veneer, not something they studied and learned, oh, if I play it this way, people will think I'm sad, but genuinely reflecting emotion, that's when I think something transformative can occur. And I think we all have really good BS detectors. We know when our favorite musicians are phoning it in and they're not really feeling it. And it's tremendously difficult to get that from an orchestra or a symphonic band, because you're now not just talking about Bruce Springsteen delivering a good night, or Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. You're talking about 40 to 100 people who all have to come together.
There's a good question in the chat I think that we could bridge from on this. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about when we met as a pre-panel the other day, and discussion came up about Joni Mitchell and opinions on changing in performance of a piece. And we don't need to get into that right now. But Joe Alter is saying, how much does priming influence the audiences? And I'm thinking about this because tomorrow night, we're going to have program notes, and we're going to be saying that this music is about this. And these composers have written off on that, but there will be some composers that would absolutely hate that. Don't tell me what my music is about. So Joe's saying, I wonder how much priming influences the audience's experience of a work. Are they told this piece is about, and they are primed to interpret it in that light. If they find it, they experience pleasure. If they don't, perhaps irritation. And then he also goes on to talk about the context of the listener. Perhaps it isn't always a function of the performance that allow one to be transformed. Perhaps the conditions surrounding listeners creating the transformative part. How much conditioning plays in on our interpretation as consumers of music in some ways?
from my point of view, and this is totally as an amateur in the music, just so I like to listen to music. That's the extent of my expertise. But I would think that you can't really do that. I mean, it either evokes the emotion or it doesn't. You can't manipulate somebody into feeling a certain way. I mean, they could pretend to feel a certain way, but do they truly feel a certain way? They either do or they don't. It's sort of like our discussion about why does some music reach us and some doesn't. Either does or doesn't. I personally don't really feel like you can do that. You could prime somebody to feel a certain way. They either will, they won't. And I think it ultimately comes down to what Daniel was saying. Does the performer, does the composer, whoever was producing the art, is it a true expression of how they feel? And they're inviting the audience in to kind of feel what they may feel, which may be the same or may be very different, but it's really subjective and individual to each person.
But I totally agree with that, and I think that as an extension of that, if you've got an instrumental piece with no lyrics and a complex instrumental piece, like the pieces you're playing tomorrow, first-time listeners might need a little help. Well, this is about dementia. And it's about, priming them in the sense of, not this is what you're supposed to feel, but, this, we had a discussion pre-meeting that was very illuminating for me, because in Jennifer's piece, there are these triangles that set it off. And I was trying to understand what they meant. Michael, do you want to repeat what you said then?
Yeah, I think that, well, I mean, it's this sort of metaphysical space. So she's going for the most ethereal sort of sounds that she can find. So it's not only triangles. It's almost all of these sort of tinny and really resonant ringing metal percussion instrument, crotales, chimes, many of them played with triangle beaters. The difference being that those are made of metal. So everything just sort of rings all over the place. And it just creates this sort of resonant space into which she introduces characters.
It's like a gong starting an Eastern religious ceremony, right?
Yeah.
And so knowing that really enhanced my sense of the piece. That little piece of information that the piece is bookended by this. She's setting off an acoustic, metaphorical, emotional space for the rest of it. And little things like that. I mean, I think that's why pre-concert talks can be very important. Again, not telling somebody this is what you must feel, but here's some of the elements at work, and this is what they're intended to do for you.
It is fascinating and true that I think that helps. And it's sort of, I don't know if it lends a formal significance that allows a person to digest a complicated piece of music that doesn't have a linguistic element the first time. But sometimes it also feels almost arbitrary to use two examples of the two pieces that I'm doing. This, the Firebird, which was a soundtrack to a very specific plot in the ballet, that for most listeners now they're entirely disconnected from it. I mean, I suspect that out of the 1,300 people in the audience, that the majority of them, if they approach that piece with any sort of plot or narrative in terms of the form, they know the animated soundtrack version in Fantasia 2000 more than they know the Ballet Russe production of the Firebird and the actual story that goes with that. And then with Jennifer's piece, I'm always reminded, when we get to music like this, of there's a great Bernstein Young People's Concert where he completely changes the story of Don Quixote, makes it something of like Superman's in prison, and explains it to a group of children, and it absolutely works, and they find it fascinating. But so I can say that in Jennifer's piece, I know, because she's told us that the flute is her instrument, and it is a symbol of her, and the clarinet is her brother Blue, who she loses, and that we create this metaphysical space. But I suppose I could just tell a story and say, you know, the flute is Frog and the clarinet is Toad, and this is the story of them traveling through the countryside one day, and here, and you know, this is where they approach a babbling brook, and here's the thunderstorm, and so in some sense, it almost feels like the narrative, though it's helpful, is sort of arbitrary. It just becomes a tool to help the listener get through experiencing.
You're reminding me that the you know, all the talk in the world really doesn't, I mean, it can help and it can frame things and it can set the listener on a path, but really it comes down to the performance. There's a song that I learned is the third most performed song in the ASCAP catalog in history. So the first is Happy Birthday. The second is the American National Anthem. The third is Wind Beneath My Wings. Third most performed song in history. I never liked that song. And I've heard people wax eloquent about it, and I've heard a lot of different versions, and people tell me what it's supposed to mean, and But I met Jeff Silbar, who was one of the writers of it, and he played for me his version of it as he wrote it on acoustic guitar, and it knocked me out. It was a gorgeous, intimate, moving, emotional song that wasn't at all cheesy or maudlin. I didn't feel manipulated. It was amazing. And there's a couple of YouTube videos of Jeff Silbar, Silbar, playing it solo. It's an entirely different experience. And I think that's just a reminder that every night is different and every performance is different. And a great piece of music in the hands of a musician who's really engaged with it can transform your life. It can heal you. It can change your mood instantly. If you're feeling sad and a sad song comes on, it can cheer you up. You're no longer alone. You're not the only one who's sad. Somebody's there at the edge of the cliff with you, and they're telling you how they feel, and it's a beautiful work of art, and you feel that same way. I'm not alone. I feel better now.
Yeah, we're definitely associative, Michael. I mean, we've never, I don't know that you and I have actually discussed the two pieces we're doing very much since we had our discussion in the spring. And I haven't spent much time with the Higdon, and I'm sure you haven't spent much time with the Mackey. Our students in the attending will appreciate this, but Mackey creates an ethereal environment with triangles in the audience, in the balcony. He has clarinets playing swells in the balcony surrounding the audience. He's chosen the same tools 20 years after Jennifer Higdon, 1999, 2018. 20 years after, you're right, telling a story with some of the same vehicle, some of the same quote unquote moves. Yeah, the associative side of what we are. You know, is a major chord happy because it's actually a happy sounding chord, or because we've always associated with that? And what did Kubrick end up doing to Strauss with Zarathustra and 2001? That we hear that we associate that differently since 1969.
And Kubrick was such a master of it. Look what he did with the music for strings, percussion, and celeste in The Shining.
Right.
You know, like Bartok writes this piece of music in praise of the beauty of the night sky, and it will forever be heard by a generation as horror movie music.
Or Singing in the Rain in Clockwork Orange.
Stravinsky also makes big use of the triangle at the culminating moments in the Firebird. So it's something about the triangle. Maybe that's what we should call the concert. Triangle.
Well, so just to touch on this, because it came up, there is nothing intrinsically happy about major chords. It's cultural, it's associative. A lot of experiments now have shown this.
That's great. I mean, from a very simple person in this research, not just exploring Western and Eastern music, we know that, but it's great to hear that there's research to back that up now. It continues. That's great.
Basically, all the people in my field do is run experiments to show scientifically what you already knew.
Here's a good question in the chat here, in the Q&A. From an anonymous attendee, how do you think this return of live music will affect conductors, musicians, listeners, both neurologically and musically after almost 2 years of being in a global pandemic? I can say already that I've had more emotional moments in rehearsals, whether the students are aware of them or not, since returning to live indoor rehearsals indoors than I'd ever had in the previous years.
Yeah, I think that the neurologic one is the part of the answer I'm going to be interested in hearing. So I'll do a chunk on the musical one. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody. I mean, we spoke earlier. Chuck brought up how much a person's identity can sometimes be built around the work that they do, and for musicians, a lot of that identity was lost in the last year and a half. So I think for a lot of people, it's emotionally positive. It's incredible to be able to be back and doing it. But also musically speaking, we're all a bit out of practice. So it's a pretty high pressure situation. And as many people would imagine, it's that many of us are just, especially the skills that we use in ensembles and in live acoustic spaces, are skills that we are exercising for the first time after a considerable break, and they are skills that you lose if you don't exercise them. So our first rehearsals were very much shaking the rust off and getting used to hearing the sound of another live person in the same room. And it's been musically, it's very tough. It's very difficult for us returning from the pandemic, and the students are working like crazy to be able to get back to where they each were at, and then still also progress from before the pandemic. So that's musically speaking. Neurologically, I don't know.
I'm going to defer to Chuck on this because I think the neurology isn't the interesting part in and of itself, the wiring. I think the clinical psychology of it, the therapeutic part of it is where the meat is on this.
When you're describing this, Michael, the word that was coming to mind, or the image I had, was like joy, like that you will likely, I anticipate you're going to experience that tomorrow. There might be the rustiness, all those things, but you're doing something that really defines like who you are, and then that collective experience with the audience also, because we talk about loss, like they have also lost, that they haven't been part of this kind of collective experience of a musical performance, and they are also going to be part of that feeling, that collective tomorrow. I mean, so I would guess you're extremely excited, both of you, and again, I think joy will be the feeling, hopefully, that you'll both have. I mean,
pandemic almost made us turn a corner in some ways. Do you remember when Eric Whitaker came out with his virtual choir years ago, the first time, and we all went, wow, look at this. He's brought in individual performers, and what an amazing product. And then we hit the pandemic, and I don't ever want to see another virtual ensemble for the rest of my life. I just want to make music with other people in the same space. I've turned by it. That technology does not need to exist for me much more.
Well, it's funny. I mean, there are pluses and minuses. The ingenuity of musicians during the lockdown, and the fierce desire to play. Musicians can still practice. They can still learn new pieces. They can still compose, but it's not the same as performing for an audience, and it's not the same as collaborating with others. But even so, there were some really great performances that came out of people working separately adding their parts one at a time. I had an extraordinary experience in May of 2020 when Renee Fleming, as artistic director of the Kennedy Center, said that she had been asked to put together a little program on music and health, and she wanted me to talk with her. And oh, by the way, could she sing a song that I had written? Yeah, I would love to hear Renee Fleming sing a song I wrote. Great. Go for it. She says, no, 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 I want you to sing it with me, and I want you to put together a little band. And this is something that could never have happened in the real world, to have Renee Fleming and me and Victor Wooten on bass and Hardy Hempel on keyboards, tremendously talented, professional, seasoned musicians who live in very different places, coming together for a one-off. And it's just an example, I think, of the indomitable spirit of musicians. Sure, I would have loved to do that live, to do it together, but it never would have happened. But yeah, I can't wait to go back out on tour. Victor and I are already talking about going out in March.
I think there's something to be said about the difference between, I guess, the pandemic has made me as a conductor, although it's not something I was really lacking that much before, but it certainly made me appreciate live music and what live music is for, and the difference in the experience. It's especially, it's funny how rare I would turn to recordings of orchestral music, because they just made me miss live performances. And so I found myself during the pandemic really leaning on things that were created to be consumed via recording. And that was at least somewhat comforting, because I didn't feel the absence of that live creation of music when we weren't able to play together. So it's great to have it back.
And there's something magical about a live performance. If it was just that we humans like listening to music surrounded by others listening to music, some enterprising entrepreneur would put up a big pair of speakers and a record player or a CD player in a great concert hall and sell tickets, and you'd all sit there and listen to the recording. But no, we want to hear it live. And I think part of that is because anything could happen. Absolutely anything could happen, no matter how seasoned the musicians are and how many times they've played it. You don't really know what you're in for. And it's going to be different than anything you've heard before in some way. Unlike the Jerry Rafferty records, which I love, but I've heard 1,000 times and I keep listening, they never change.
If anybody in the chat has anything they'd like to add, that's great. Daniel, did you have a chance? You had mentioned at the opening about wanting to touch on some socio-political sides of music and health. And I just want to make sure, and some radical change things that you wanted to hopefully bring about. Have you had a chance to speak on those?
Well, I think the real message here is that all of us here in this virtual room know about the power of music, or we wouldn't be here. And we know that music can heal our psychological selves. We may not know that music can relieve pain and that it can boost the immune system, but there are other tangible physical benefits to music listening and performing. And the National Institutes of Health and the Renee Fleming Foundation have been working for the last few years, along with the AARP, to get the message out. The socio-political issue is that music therapy really works, not for everybody. No therapy works for everybody, not for every condition and every person, but it really works. And it can dramatically reduce healthcare costs. one easy case is music and pain. Music releases opioids in your brain, endogenous opioids. Not enough that you wouldn't have to take an opioid, but enough that you wouldn't have to take a full dose and you wouldn't have to take it as long. And we may not have had the opioid crisis if governments and health insurers recognized that music is an adjunct to pain relief. Something a lot of people have figured out on their own anyway, but there's a nascent movement around the world to put music therapy front and center, and I think that's the big issue, is that we all need to advocate for it, or it won't happen.
Yeah, I would totally support that, and it's just in terms of some background on musical therapists. There's around 80 academic programs around the United States to train individuals to be music therapists, and it's typically an undergraduate or it's a master's program, and they, you basically learn, obviously you learn music, but you also learn kind of the ideas of how it provides like therapeutic positive change for individuals, and there's a board exam, and so it's a very structured type of profession. But I totally agree, with you, Daniel, about we need to look at maybe pharmacological interventions and things that are really healthy for people that as alternatives, or maybe as first order types of interventions.
That same Valium that you might pay $5 for at the CVS drugstore on the corner, in a hospital, in an operating room, can cost anywhere between $500 and $750. That same one tablet. And there's ample research showing that people listening to music in that operating room are going to experience the same kind of relief from anxiety as the Valium would. No side effects, no cost really, other than paying the small licensing fee to stream it or buy it. And it's just something that's not on enough people's radar. Let alone, going out to a concert. I mean, I don't know that it'll be so long before a psychiatrist writes a prescription for go out to a concert tonight, instead of a prescription for Prozac.
Awesome idea.
And your tickets will be paid for by your healthcare provider.
Maybe they'll write a prescription for more cowbell.
Oh.
I got a fever, and the only prescription for that fever is more cowbell.
I can't think of a better note to start wrapping up our panel discussion than that one. Thanks everybody for everything. Michael, Chuck, Daniel, any final input, any final things we'd like to add to our discussion here?
I just want to say to everybody who is not watching this on YouTube, for everybody who's here right now, live, we're looking at this Zoom meeting, there are still 30 tickets available. Please join us tomorrow night at the concert for Nothing Gold Could Stay and hear this music that we've been talking about. We will write you a prescription for this concert.
Elizabeth has put the information in the chat.
Yes, thank you for letting me be part of this great discussion. It was a wonderful experience. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
So let's thank everyone. Let's thank Chuck, Daniel, Michael, and Shannon for such a stimulating session. Fabulous coda to this conversation. It's going to go down in the history books. As a reminder, as Michael was suggesting, the performance of Nothing Gold Can Stay will take place tomorrow evening, November 4th at 7:30 p.m. live at the Balboa Theater in downtown San Diego. For tickets, please visit the website for Ticketmaster, the link to which has been posted in the chat box. There's also been a link to a survey, which we would be grateful for your response as it helps us to improve our programming. The survey will also be emailed to everyone who registered for the event in case you don't have a chance to do it right now. We hope you will attend other events sponsored by One SDSU and Arts Alive SDSU. The websites for those organizations can also be linked to through the chat box. And we greatly appreciate your physical presence wherever you are and joining us this afternoon. And we look forward to seeing you at tomorrow evening's performance. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you again.